The big question for many of us at the moment is what's going to happen to property prices in the future. By that I mean the rest of 2021 and even beyond 2021. And you'll know that I've made some tentative predictions as to what could happen. If you look back at some of my previous videos, one of the things which I've talked about a lot is the fact that we are now no longer in a proper market cycle. In the old days, there was a defined economic cycle and the property market largely followed the economic cycle. But because of COVID and because of government intervention and because the government have been trying to pump the property market, in my opinion, that cycle is no longer relevant, and we have to kind of like move on and sort of try and take a different view of what could happen. And in any case, even without pandemics and even without government intervention, making predictions is a bit of a mug's game really, isn't it? Because whatever you think is probably never going to happen. But I'm glad to say that not everybody shares this view, and I was interested to see that Savills recently have updated their predictions for 2021. And the interesting thing is, despite the pandemic, despite some uncertainties around the economy, despite the fact that nobody's quite sure what's going to happen when furlough ends, Savills actually have a very bullish outlook for this year and for the next 4 years after. So I'll tell you what we'll do, let's just jump onto the computer and we'll have a look and see what they say. Now I know that Savills have found themselves embroiled in some controversy following the Euros final, and I don't want to get into that. With that said though, there are things about Savills which I quite like, and one of the things which I like is they very much follow the Keynesian view, which I totally agree with, which says that when the facts change, I change my opinion. And Savills have identified that the facts have changed, so they have updated their opinion. And as of the 27th of July, this is their opinion looking forward as to what they think is now going to happen. So they've updated their predictions for the UK property market, and they've actually said that they think it's going to perform better than they thought it was going to back in March. So it's quite a sudden change. Why is that? Well, if we look down at the bottom, if I scroll down, we can see that rather than now predicting 1.4 million housing transactions in the UK this year, they're predicting 1.62 million housing transactions. And that extra demand, coupled with still limited supply, is going to push property prices further and higher than they were predicting back in March. So we will get to the actual figures in a moment. Another thing which I think is quite interesting and which I agree with entirely is that there's a lot of talk at the moment about inflation. I'm talking about inflation. I mean, it's there to be seen, isn't it? Because the central banks around the world are printing money like it's going out of fashion. And it's just, you know, they're just printing and printing and printing. And a lot of people are saying that that's going to cause inflation. And the knee-jerk reaction is, if you mention inflation, everybody says, oh, well, interest rates are going to go up. But the world's not as simple as that anymore. Because the world is now so indebted, central banks around the world have got far less ability to be able to raise interest rates in order to be able to curtail inflation. And here, Savills are predicting that base rates are going to stay the same until 2024, when it's going to go up marginally, and then it could be up to as high as 0.5% in 2025. Well, of course, 0.5% is next to nothing, but as I say, the world is so indebted now that is now, in today's terms, quite a big increase. Are we ever going to see 5% interest rates again? Well, who knows? I mean, you can never say never, and this is the problem with making predictions, isn't it? But I doubt we're going to see anything like that for many, many years, maybe even decades, but who knows? But at the moment, this seems a very sensible prediction. So given that interest rates are going to stay low, that is one of the things which they think is going to drive property prices. Now, another question which we all have been wrestling with probably is what's going to happen at the end of September when the stamp duty holiday is taken away. Well, you know my views on this. I still think there's every possibility that the stamp duty holiday as is now, which is basically 0% up to £250,000 for owner-occupiers, I think there's a very good chance that Rishi Sunak might actually keep that. But even if he doesn't, Savills are basically suggesting it's not going to make very much difference. In fact, the reality is that the savings on stamp duty now are fairly marginal. And one of the things which we have seen is that buyers have been moaning that they actually paid extra over and above to secure a property during the stamp duty holiday, and the amount extra they paid was actually more than the stamp duty they would have saved. So, all these things come out in the wash. It's one of those things which captured the public imagination and made people go out and buy, but in actual fact it probably wasn't such a great thing for buyers as maybe the headlines would have suggested. Anyway, a discussion for another time. The point is, it's probably not going to make much difference in September whether they leave it or whether they take it away. So that's another thing which they've taken into account. So what does this mean in terms of their predictions for property prices going forward? So this is their predictions for 2021, updated from March, which wasn't very long ago, but there's been something of a boom, and so they're now saying that rather than average prices going up across the UK by 4%, they're going to go up by 9%, more than doubled, which is pretty good. And where are the best performing regions going to be? Well, pretty much everywhere except London. I mean, London, they're predicting plus 7% this year, which isn't bad, but everywhere else is going to do better. So we can see, for example, the North West plus 10.5%, the same in Yorkshire and Humber, Wales plus 10%, Scotland plus 9.5%, North East plus 8%, East Midlands plus 9%, West Midlands plus 9%. South West and the South East are also doing pretty well at plus 8.5 and plus 9. East of England plus 8%, and London coming in at the rear with 7%, which isn't too bad really. Now, of course, the thing to look at is what happens in 2022, 2023 and onwards to 2025, because things do start to slow down everywhere. And when we look at the figures projected going forward, we can see that generally speaking it's the North and the Midlands, areas like that, which are going to be doing better than the South East and London. So I'll leave this chart here. You can always sort of pause the video and have a look at this, but basically they're predicting that the sort of northern regions are going to do twice as well as London, but we're still only talking about 4 to 4.5% in the North and the Midlands as opposed to 2% in London. And that seems to be the pattern that they're predicting for the next 5 years, with the upshot being that London will go up, in their view, by 12.5%, give or take, over the next 5 years, whereas somewhere like the Northwest is going to go up plus 28% over the next 5 years. And this is a classic example of something which I've mentioned in a few of my videos previously, the ripple effect, where prices go up in London and then they ripple out across the country and they go up in all the different regions going away from London, and it can take years for that ripple to move out from London, and by the time it hits the north, prices in London are then going down again. So we will eventually see, of course, prices going down in the rest of the country, by which time prices may well be going back up in London. Very interesting view that they have here. Now, of course, how much can we read into this? Well, probably not very much, because who can know what's going to be happening in a year's time or 5 years' time? Who's going to even know what's happening tomorrow? It only takes for another pandemic with a deadly variant to be discovered, and we could be back into lockdown and all of these figures could be shot to pieces. We just don't know. But all things being equal, this seems to be a fairly reasonable prediction of what could happen. So anyway, I just think it's very interesting to see what other people think could happen in the property market, and I think it's very brave of Savills to actually put out a 5-year prediction, given that they've had to readjust their prediction for this year after just a few months. And probably the truth is that they will have to keep readjusting and rethinking this, obviously, over the next 5 years. Very unlikely that what they say is going to happen will be what happens, but we have to start somewhere. I hope you found this video useful and informative, and if you did, then please come over to my website www.thepropertyteacher.co.uk, where you'll find loads more great property related resources, including free special reports to download and my best-selling series of ebooks, which includes the Successful Property Renovators Workshop, 63 common defects in investment property and how to spot them. And if you're just starting out in property, or if you want to grow your portfolio, you may be particularly interested in the Successful Property Investors Strategy Workshop, in which I'll take you through exactly how I started and built my property portfolio, starting literally with none of my own money, and how I built a portfolio of £2 million worth of property in just 4 years. And that was starting from scratch. I'll take you through everything that I did right so that you can copy me and do the same. And I'll also show you everything that I did wrong so that you can avoid the mistakes that I made, and so that you can progress in property and be far more successful far more quickly than I ever was. And this is based upon my own real life experience, and it took me about 4 years to actually work out how to do property investing properly. But in the 200 pages in the Successful Property Investors Strategy Workshop, I'm going to show you all of that 4 years knowledge condensed down so that you can use it immediately. And until next time, here's to successful property investing.